Commas with Mary Morrell.
A misplaced comma can be very costly. A very famous example is a 2006 dispute between a Canadian cable company and a telephone company. The telephone company wanted to give a year's notice and get out of the contract early, and the cabling company argued that the contract was for a minimum of 5 years, and that the telephone company had to, at the end of that period, give a year's notice that they didn't want to renew it. So the debate was all about the second comma. And the argument is that if you take out the information between the two commas, the sentence reads really differently. And the information between the two commas is incidental, extra information. So who was right? Now, it went to the regulator, and the regulator decided that the telephone company was right and that they could get out of the contract. However, it went to appeal. Unfortunately for the cabling company, the French version was clear, and so they won the case. Now, why it is called $1 million comma, I'm not quite sure. That must be something to do with the contract terms, but the dispute was all about the comma. When you have two commas and extra information between those two commas, it is known as non-restrictive in grammatical terms. It is extra information that is not essential to the meaning of the sentence. A cheaper example from 2014 is a woman who appealed a parking ticket. She had parked in an area that specified which vehicles could not park there for more than 24 hours, and it said motor vehicle camper. She successfully argued that her pickup truck was not a motor vehicle camper. Now, had there been a comma after motor vehicle, she wouldn't have won that case. I'm sure they've changed the sign. So here are some common examples that are often given to illustrate the difference a comma can make. Let's eat grandpa, let's eat grandpa. No thanks to you, no thanks to you, and so on. We use commas to separate items in a list. I think that's fairly straightforward, and we don't usually have a comma before and at the end of the list. But occasionally we need a comma before and it's known as a serial comma or an Oxford comma. A famous urban myth is that a woman left her estate to Jack, Kim, Alice and Rosie. Jack and Kim decided that that meant her estate was to be divided into 3 and that Alice and Rosie were to share 1/3. It would have been very different had there been a comma after Alice before the and. It would have been obvious then that the estate was to be divided into 4 portions. The difference a comma can make. They also separate clauses. So in this example, he's been running a restaurant for years, comma, but now he wants to retire and go sailing. So we've got 2 main ideas known as main clauses or independent clauses, so they are usually separated by a comma. In my opinion, if the meaning is clear and the sentence is reasonably short, you can sometimes drop this comma out with no loss of meaning. That's why commas, unfortunately, can be tricky, because not all writers and editors agree on their use, and if you start looking at writing in terms of commas, you will find that the usage is not always consistent. But that is the rule. You use them to join 2 independent clauses. We also use them to separate adjectives, and like a list, that is fairly straightforward. Beautiful, delicately perfumed red roses. They also separate interrupters. We did, however, finally reach an agreement. They also separate beginning and end statements. At last, a dessert I can cook and be proud of. Strawberries go well with pavlova, don't they? Once again, I think if the beginning statement is quite short, for instance, in 2016, we developed a plan. I'm seeing that comma after in 2016 drop out. We use them to enclose extra information, and this goes back to the contract we looked at the beginning. So the rainbow, which stretched right across the sky, made my day. We could say the rainbow made my day. We don't need that extra information, so it is known as non-restrictive or non-defining, and it needs a comma at either end. Another example of enclosing information is when we have what's known as an appositive after a noun, and that's when we're adding extra information about that noun. So if you look at this example, the raccoon, comma, also known as the common raccoon, comma, is native to North America. So the raccoon is native to North America. That sentence is complete without that extra information, and that extra information must have 2 commas, one at either end, because it's an appositive. So I'm just going to talk about a couple of comma problems, and they are run-on sentences and comma splices. Run-on sentences are also known as fused sentences. I used to think that these referred to sentences that went on and on and on and on and on, but it's not true. It is actually to do with the fact that they don't have punctuation. So they can be quite short. This example is quite short. The meeting was long, we couldn't agree. So this sentence either needs to have a semicolon, the meeting was long, semicolon, a dash, the meeting was long, dash, or a conjunction, the meeting was long because we couldn't agree, or a comma plus a conjunction, the meeting was long, comma, and we couldn't agree. Now one thing it can't have is just a comma. The meeting was long, comma, we couldn't agree, because that is creating the second problem, which is a comma splice. A comma isn't strong enough to join 2 main, also known as independent, clauses. So here's another example of a comma splice. He's retired, he's going sailing every day. So how could we fix this? We could say he's retired, semicolon, he's going sailing every day. Now that probably makes it a little bit formal looking at the photo. So we could say he's retired, dash, he's going sailing every day. Or we could add a conjunction, a joining word, he's retired, comma, so he's going sailing every day. We could reverse the sentence and say he's going sailing every day because he's retired. So many ways to fix a comma splice, but a comma on its own isn't strong enough to join 2 main, also known as independent, clauses. So remember, the most important principle is clarity. Commas, I think, are quite confusing, and we do tend to use fewer than in the past, but we definitely need them for clarity. We do not want to make million-dollar mistakes or even more minor mistakes. To learn more about punctuation, register for my online course, Grammar, Punctuation and Usage.